Chapter 12, So It Turns Out, Part 1. This year, the Lunar New Year came unusually early. Christmas had just passed, and in the blink of an eye, it was already the Spring Festival. Naturally, they had to return to Y City for the new year. Y City wasn't far from a city, and under normal circumstances, it would take just over 3 hours by car. However, due to the New Year rush, Yichen and Mosheng set off in the morning, and by the time they arrived in Y City, it was already past 1 in the afternoon. Mosheng had noticed that the people around her had been unusually quiet for a long time. Yichen couldn't help but turn his head. She had been nervous since yesterday, but why did she feel better after arriving in Y City? Mosheng was staring blankly out the car window, not even noticing Yichen's gaze that had been fixed on her for a long time. An inexplicable emotion flashed through Yichen's eyes, and he paused for a moment before speaking up, calling her name, Mosheng. Ha! It took Mosheng a moment to react, and she turned to him, asking, "What? Do you know how to play mahjong?" Mahjong? Mosheng suspected that she had misheard. Auntie likes to play mahjong. If you don't know how to play, she might be disappointed. Yichen said casually, but he deliberately made it sound serious. Mosheng was taken aback, and all the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind vanished, leaving only the word mahjong. What should I do? I'm not very good at it. Mosheng was extremely upset. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I'm not prepared at all. There's still time to prepare now. Yichen smiled faintly and parked the car. Mosheng, we're here. How long had it been since she had celebrated such a lively New Year? Outside the window, the snow was flying, and the sound of firecrackers kept coming from afar. The whole family sat together, eating the New Year's Eve dinner, while the elders chattered endlessly. You two children are becoming less filial as you grow older. One of you has a boyfriend and didn't tell your mother, the other doesn't even mention marriage. Yi Mei made a face at Yichen. Mom, you've been saying this all afternoon. Since the children are rare guests, let them enjoy their meal. Stop nagging. Mr. He said. I think you're just tired of me. Mrs. He then turned to talk about Mr. He, afraid of his wife for his whole life. He immediately put on a pitiful face. Zhang Su, who couldn't understand the dialect, kept pestering Yi Mei to translate, and Yi Mei was annoyed. A grown man was acting like a spoiled child. Mosheng listened with a smile, having been used to spending the New Year cold and lonely abroad. In such a warm atmosphere, she even felt hesitant to speak. After dinner, Mrs. He organized everyone to play mahjong. Yichen had long escaped to the study, while Yi Mei volunteered to wash the dishes. So, only the obedient Mr. He, Mosheng, and the future son-in-law were left at the table. Mrs. He was an old hand at playing mahjong, and Mr. He, who had been her sparring partner for decades, was not weak either. Yi Mei's boyfriend was a businessman, naturally calculating. Unfortunately, Mosheng had spent so many years abroad that she knew little about the traditional Chinese game. She was drafted in, but ended up losing miserably. Yichen came out of the study, unable to believe what he saw. Less than an hour, and you've managed to lose so badly. Mosheng was extremely embarrassed, stammering, just bad luck. Yichen patted her shoulder and told her to stand up. Let me handle it. This was called an evenly matched contest. Mosheng watched with increasing interest, and by 1 o'clock, she still didn't want to go to bed. Yichen tried to send her to bed twice, but she refused, so he finally put on a stern face, and Mosheng had no choice but to go to sleep. In the middle of the night, Mosheng woke up in a daze when she heard the door open. She turned on the bedside lamp. Are you done? you win or lose? Yichen lifted the blanket and lay down, looking tired. Auntie lost by herself. Mosheng glared at him. How can you three grown men be so shameless? It's the He family rule, no father and son at the gambling table. Besides, Auntie won't stop even if she loses everything. Yichen pulled her into his arms. Go to sleep, I'm exhausted. It's all because of you being so useless. Mosheng immediately felt guilty. He was already so busy with work, and now he had to endure such torment when he came home for the new year. It was really pitiful. So she obediently fell asleep in his arms and stopped bothering him. After a while, she felt his warm lips wandering around her neck, and Mosheng gasped softly, "Aren't you tired?" Yichen's voice was somewhat blurred. I can be even more tired. On the morning of the first day of the new year, Mosheng woke up at around 7 o'clock. She sat up and put on her clothes, but Yichen dragged her back into bed. Why are you getting up so early? Yichen said sleepily. To make breakfast. Let go. Mosheng struggled to free his large hand that was holding her waist, but Yichen didn't even move a finger. Mosheng helplessly gave up. Yichen. Sleep with me a little longer. Really? Mosheng muttered, Yichen, you're acting strange today. Yichen's body stiffened, and he fell silent for a few seconds before his voice sounded somewhat unnatural. What's strange? Simply acting like a child. Mosheng complained. Yichen's fingers relaxed slightly. Stop making trouble and go to sleep. There seemed to be no one moving outside, and Mosheng compromised. After all, she couldn't break free from him. Then let me sleep a little longer. However, this sleeping position was uncomfortable. With her eyes closed for less than a minute, Mosheng became restless again, tried to push away Yichen's arm that was lying across her head. How could a girl sleep like this? Yichen opened his eyes. Can you stop moving? Mosheng frowned with a distressed look, wanting a pillow. Pillows were softer and more comfortable. Yichen, your arm will get sore sleeping like this. She really was considerate of him. If she slept on her own, the result would probably be that they both caught a cold. So, she better held him tightly, and Yichen pretended not to hear her, closing his eyes to sleep. Mosheng stared at him for a while, but there was no solution. She couldn't fall asleep in her. Eyes wandered around the room, finally stopping on the handsome face in front of her. Yichen is really good looking. She kissed him quietly, and Mosheng finally felt a little drowsy, her thoughts becoming vague as she planned to wake up a little earlier. But when she opened her eyes again, it was already past 10 o'clock, and Yichen wasn't in bed. Mosheng quickly got up, put on her clothes, and walked out of the room. Yichen and Mr. He were playing chess in the living room. Mosheng felt a little embarrassed and called out softly, Uncle. Mr. He smiled and nodded at her. Mosheng walked over to Yichen and complained in a low voice, Why didn't you call me? Aha! Yichen was holding chess pieces, his mind focused on the board. After making his move, he looked up and said, Go help Auntie in the kitchen. Oh. Mosheng looked into the kitchen, where only Mrs. He was busy. Alright. Mrs. He saw Mosheng come in and greeted her with a smile. You're up. Did you sleep well last night? Mosheng nodded in a hurry. She was probably the latest one to get up, so how could she not be used to it? Auntie, let me do this. She took the knife from Mrs. He's hand and started cutting the meat into strips. Mrs. He picked up some vegetables to wash and chatted with Mosheng, talking about this and that. Suddenly, she exclaimed, realizing she had forgotten to ask a question that she should have asked a long time ago. Look at me, I'm so forgetful. Little Sheng, your parents. Mosheng was taken aback, nearly cutting her finger. She bit her lip, should she say it? She looked up and saw Mrs. He's kind and gentle smile. Mosheng didn't want to deceive her, so she decided to tell the truth. My father. Mosheng. Her words were interrupted, and Yichen appeared at the kitchen door, his face a little pale, and his jaw tense. What's the matter with this child? Suddenly appearing like that scared me. Mrs. He patted her chest. Yichen's expression eased a bit, but his eyes didn't relax. Mosheng, where did you put my coat? I can't find it. Oh. Mosheng was stunned for a moment and washed her hands before going to the bedroom. The coat was hanging on a rack next to the bed, in a very conspicuous place where it could be seen as soon as one entered the room. Mosheng stood in front of the rack, feeling a whirlwind of emotions in her heart. Yichen took off his coat from behind her. Don't overthink things. I just don't want them to have any ideas about you. He sighed softly. Mosheng, have a little more confidence in me. His words contained a hint of bitterness that made Mosheng's heart ache. She had thought too much. Yichen. I would rather you be careless and thoughtless. Don't think too much. Yichen rubbed her head. It's quite troublesome. But you won't feel distressed. Let's go out to eat. Auntie should have finished cooking. During the meal, Mrs. He asked about Mosheng's parents again, and Mosheng only said that her father had passed away and her mother was overseas. Mrs. He sighed twice and didn't ask further. She only thought about persuading everyone to take a walk after the meal for a little exercise. Unfortunately, no one wanted to participate. Mr. He wanted to take a nap. May wanted to take Jiangsu to visit famous attractions in Y City, so Mrs. He could only give up reluctantly. As for last night, Yichen couldn't get much sleep, so he used the afternoon to catch up on rest. Mosheng woke up late in the morning and had no desire to sleep, so she started playing with Yichen's old stuff while he was sleeping. She found pleasure in studying an old exam paper for a long time, observing how he wrote back then and checking the mistakes he made. She also read Yichen's old essays, one by one. His argumentative essays were excellent, usually scoring around 90 points. Mosheng couldn't help but feel envious, as she remembered her own argumentative essays back then, which were only scoring around 60. Fortunately, Yichen's expressive essays were not that good, which brought her some comfort. When Yichen woke up, he saw Mosheng sitting on the wooden floor, going through his old things, so he coughed to remind her, Mrs. He, you are invading my personal privacy. Yichen, you're awake. Mosheng looked up, her eyes shining brightly with excitement. Do you have anything else interesting? She had really become addicted to this activity. Yichen smiled and pulled her up, saying, don't sit on the floor. Bending over to look through the scattered items on the floor, Mosheng asked, why does Auntie keep all these things? How old do you think I am in this photo? Mosheng handed him an old picture. In the photo, Yichen was still young, looking handsome and upright, wearing the uniform of Y City No. 1 High School and holding a trophy. Probably when I was in my first year of high school, participating in the national physics competition. Physics. Weren't you studying law? Yeah, but I was in the science stream in high school. I wish I had gone to the same high school as you. Mosheng regretted, I could have gone there too, but I thought it was too far from home, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning. Fortunately, you're lazy. Yichen sounded genuinely relieved. It gave me a peaceful high school life. Mosheng glared at him fiercely. Are there more photos? Yichen took out an album from the top of the cabinet. Not many, our family members aren't fond of taking pictures. The album was quite old-fashioned, indicating its age. When they opened it, they saw a baby picture with the words Yichen's 100 days written on it. The baby in the photo looked fair and tender, with a slight frown between the eyebrows, looking very imposing. Mosheng stared at it for a long time in disbelief and said, "Yichen, it turns out you were so serious from the day you were born." "Babies don't have expressions," Yichen frowned. "They do." Mosheng argued, "My dad said I used to smile when I saw the camera in my childhood." Most of the photos after that were group pictures, showing a young woman holding a child, leaning against her young husband with happiness in their eyes. Even though the photo quality was poor back then, it still managed to showcase the woman's elegance and the man's handsomeness. Yichen resembled his father more in appearance. Mosheng fell silent and silently flipped through the only album. Then she looked up at Yichen. "I'm fine." Yichen took the album from her hands. "It's been so long, and any emotions have faded." Mosheng carefully looked into his eyes and finally felt reassured. "Shall we visit them to see how they're doing?" "Let's wait until Qingming Festival." Yichen gently stroked her hair that had been nibbled on by the puppy. "We'll go when your hair grows tidy, so you won't become an ugly daughter-in-law." The spring break wasn't too long, and most of the time, Mosheng was dragged by Aunt He to play mahjong for leisure. Unfortunately, after several days of intensive training, she didn't make any progress. She would look at the cards on the table and forget what she had, and when she looked at her own cards, she couldn't remember what others had played. Yichen could only shake his head and sigh. He didn't know if it was a relief or a pity that his wife wasn't talented in this area. At least she wouldn't lose money at the mahjong table in the future. The next day, Yichen and Mosheng bid farewell to reluctant Mr. and Mrs. He and started their journey back to City A. Wei and Zhang Su had to go to work earlier than them, so they left 2 days ago. Before leaving Y City, they went to Qinghenu village again, but this time, it seemed like they missed her again. Mosheng knocked on the door for several minutes, but no one answered. "Should we wait for a while?" Mosheng shook her head and said, "Let's forget it and leave." The old building had narrow and deep stairs, and when they were going downstairs, Mosheng gave some experienced advice. "You need to walk slowly on this kind of stairs, or you might bump into someone at the turn." Yichen looked at her and asked, "How many times have you bumped into someone?" "Not many," Mosheng mumbled. "It's okay, just a few times." It was actually many times, and not watching where she was going while walking was one of her habits. Yichen reached out and gently touched her cheek, looking left and right, before he let out a sigh. "Fortunately, you haven't bumped into anyone." Mosheng made a funny face at him. Sitting in the car, Mosheng looked back at the old building with a faint sense of melancholy. They still couldn't meet her this time, and although she and her mother were related, perhaps their fate was still too shallow. The car quickly left the entrance of the neighborhood. Mosheng looked out of the window casually, but she suddenly called out, "Yichen, stop the car." Yichen stepped on the brake, and the high-performance car came to a stop in the shortest time possible. Mosheng opened the car door and went after something. Yichen didn't get out of the car. Instead, he looked through the rearview mirror and saw Mosheng catching up with a slender middle-aged woman several dozen meters away. Suddenly, he felt a sense of irritability, and he subconsciously reached into his pocket for a cigarette, but he found nothing. He then remembered that he had decided to completely quit smoking recently, and he didn't have any cigarettes on him. He closed his eyes, sighed, leaned back on the seat, and turned on the car's audio system. Soft music flowed out gently, soothing his mind. After listening to the same piano piece for he didn't know how many times, he heard a tapping sound on the window. Yichen opened his eyes and saw Mosheng. instance, Mosheng's mother, Pei Fangmei, watched her daughter and a tall, handsome young man walking towards her. Her eyesight was not good, so she couldn't see his appearance clearly, but she vaguely felt that he had an outstanding temperament. It seemed that little Sheng had a good eye. However, Pei Fangmei frowned. Just now, little Sheng said his name was Yichen. Yichen, why does this name give her a familiar feeling? In the blink of an eye, the person was already in front of them, and Pei Fangmei could see his appearance clearly. Indeed, he looked like a talented individual. Mosheng introduced them to each other. This is my mother. He is the one I mentioned, Yichen. Hello, Yichen greeted with a faint voice. Pei Fangmei's thoughtful gaze lingered on him, and the feeling of something not being right grew stronger. She smiled somewhat reservedly and said, "So, you are Yichen. Little Sheng has a good eye." "Yes," Mosheng replied with a touch of embarrassment. None of them spoke further. There wasn't much to say. They all wanted to ask about forbidden topics, and greetings were exchanged with just a few sentences. "Yichen, do you have your business cards with you?" Mosheng remembered to ask. Yichen nodded and said, "They are in the car. I'll go get them." He quickly brought his business cards, and on the back, he hastily wrote down his phone number. He handed the card to Pei Fangmei and said, "This is my contact information. If you want to reach me, you can call this number." Pei Fangmei took the card, glanced at it, and said, "Since you're in a hurry to leave, I won't keep you." "Okay," Mosheng responded, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Then, we'll go." They hastily bid farewell to Pei Fangmei, got back into the car, and Mosheng's expression instantly became much more relaxed. It's good like this. After all, it's been 8 years since we last met. This kind of polite meeting makes it easier. Yichen didn't pay attention to what she said. He remembered the thoughtful and scrutinizing gaze from Pei Fangmei earlier, and he felt a bunch of doubts in his heart. Had she recalled something? Mosheng noticed that he was lost in thought and couldn't help pushing his hand. "Yichen, are you back on Earth yet?" With a clear, smiling gaze, Yichen's doubts remained unresolved, and his headache returned. Why did he feel that certain aspects of someone's personality, which had caused him so much headache in the past, were coming back to life? Could it be that old habits die hard after all? Chapter 12. So it turns out, Part 2. The fact proves that the words of the ancients are indeed reasonable, and his premonition is also correct. At 27 years old, Xiao Mosheng is certainly much more sensible than when she was 18 or 19, but some of Yichen's familiar little quirks have clearly not left him with age. For example, when he can't argue with reason, he resorts to being unreasonable. He becomes more and more fond of sticking to her. He lets her pick the dishes he doesn't like to eat, and so on. While lawyer, he secretly admits that he enjoys it. Besides, it wasn't easy to bring back these little temperaments of hers. The wedding banquet was scheduled for 1.5 months later, and Yichen planned to take some time off after the banquet. So during this time, he was busy finishing up his work, passing on tasks to others, and turning down invitations to be a special guest at legal events. As for the preparations for the wedding banquet, such as the guest list, booking the hotel, and other annoying things, Yichen took care of them all himself, leaving Mosheng relatively relaxed. In fact, all these tasks could have been handled by a professional wedding planning company, but Yichen clearly preferred to do it himself. However, Mosheng also had a headache. She couldn't find bridesmaids. Yimei was not available. She got married quickly after the new year. Xiaohong was even less suitable. Mosheng had already been scolded and treated to several meals because of reasons such as concealing the true marital status of the kind, pure-hearted people. When she mentioned it to Xiaohong, she screamed, "No, if I'm a bridesmaid again, I'll never get married." Her terrified expression made Mosheng feel guilty. And then there was Xiao Xiao. After hearing the news from Yichen, she called Mosheng on the phone and sounded much more gentle than the last time they met, even offering to be the matchmaker. In any case, none of them wanted to be bridesmaids. The final choice was a bit unexpected. That night, Yichen was in the bedroom studying some complicated materials, and he strictly forbade Mosheng from making any noise to disturb him. Mosheng was lying on the bed, writing invitation cards. Yichen had already prepared the guest list, she just needed to copy it neatly. But what were these characters? Yichen's handwriting was so sloppy. Mosheng held the paper and looked at it from all angles for a long time. She didn't recognize them. She bit her pen, wondering if she should ask Yichen. She glanced at him concentrating on his work. He seemed to have said not to disturb him. Forget it, maybe it's better to skip these for now. Of course, Mosheng was not such an obedient person. Back in college, she was best at appearing to comply while doing otherwise. But at that time, even if Yichen put on a sour face, he would just scold her a little and that was it. Now that they were married, some of Yichen's punishments had no bounds. Honestly, she was a bit afraid of him. Mosheng blushed at the thought. She couldn't have imagined Yichen being like this before. But it was so boring. As she continued to copy, Mosheng couldn't help herself and took a blank piece of paper to write. "Yichen, you made me and my colleague fall out." She handed it to him. This couldn't be considered as speaking to disturb him, right? Yichen had initially not intended to pay her any attention. He glanced at the words on the paper, which seemed rather serious, and wrote underneath, "What happened?" "It's Tao Yijing. You know, she found out that we knew each other before and got really angry. She thought I deliberately hid it from her, but how could I explain it to her with our past?" Yichen rubbed his forehead, then wrote on the note, "Is it serious?" and added a pitiful crying face. It's quite serious. I talked to her and explained carefully. I even asked her to be a bridesmaid, and she agreed, happy face, but she said she won't give a red envelope. Indeed, it was quite serious. Yichen tossed the note into the trash bin, and then pulled her up. "I think you're just bored." She was trapped in his arms, and he clasped his hand around her waist. She tried to climb up, her hands resting on his chest, and the fresh scent of his post-shower presence filled his nose. Yichen had a moment of fascination. All of this was his desire, and from now on, no matter what, he wouldn't let go. A few days before the wedding banquet, an unexpected visitor came to the law firm. Yichen had just returned from the procuratorate when Mei Ting said to him, "Lawyer He, a lady has been waiting for you for a while." Following Mei Ting's direction, Yichen saw the guest standing up elegantly as he approached. It was Mosheng's mother, HeYiShengXiaoMo. "Please, take your time." Mei Ting placed the tea on the coffee table in front of HeYiShengXiaoMo. "Thank you." HeYiShengXiaoMo nodded slightly. As the former mayor's wife, she was undoubtedly graceful and composed. Mei Ting softly closed the door, and the office fell into an unusual silence. HeYiShengXiaoMo observed the young man behind the desk in silence and began, "We briefly met last time, and you should remember who I am." Of course. Yichen replied casually, "Mrs. Zhao." The cold address increased HeYiShengXiaoMo's suspicion. She smiled more kindly and said, "You don't have to be so distant. Since you and Xiaoxing are married now, it's only appropriate to call me your mother-in-law." Yichen gave a faint smile but remained silent. HeYiShengXiaoMo smiled again and said, "If you're not used to it, you can call me Ms. Pei." Ms. Pei. This time, Yichen readily agreed. I'm curious about the purpose of your visit. Pei Fangmei took a light sip of tea and calmly said, in our brief conversation last time, Xiaoxing spoke highly of you. I'm just here to get to know you better, and there's no need for lawyer He to be so guarded. If Xiaoxing hears how concerned you are about her, she should be very happy. Pei Fangmei looked at the sharp-eyed young man and said kindly, are you feeling wronged for Xiaoxing? Xichen's face remained expressionless. HeYiSheng has never felt wronged. I don't need to go to such lengths. That's true. Pei Fangmei furrowed her brows slightly and sighed. From her childhood to now, I haven't fulfilled my responsibilities as a mother. On the one hand, I was busy with my career, and on the other hand, I didn't have a good relationship with her father. I've neglected her. Fortunately, she's not that sensitive, and she has grown up healthy. She paused, seeming to have some emotion. Then she continued, actually, I'm trying to make up for it now, but I'm not sure if there's still a chance. Facing her sincere words, Yichen was unmoved. If you want to express motherly love, there's no need to go through all these circles. I think you should go directly to Mosheng. Pei Fangmei carefully observed his expression. You seem to have hostility towards me. Perhaps it's just your illusion. An awkward silence ensued. Pei Fangmei lowered her voice and said gently, I hope you can make me a promise. Although I'm not close to Xiaoxing, she is still my daughter. There was no immediate response. Pei Fangmei, usually proud and confident, was already at her limit to bow down to Mosheng. She was about to turn and leave when she heard the young man behind her, in a calm and serene tone, make a statement. They gave me 10 years, and I want Mosheng for a lifetime. His voice was filled with an indescribable weariness, and he paused before adding, I succumb to the warmth of reality. Pei Fangmei was stunned for a moment, then she understood that this was the promise she wanted. She turned back. The young man standing by the French window was shrouded in a soft golden sunlight, and he gave her a desolate side profile. Pei Fangmei might have wanted to say something, but she heard his soft request. Mosheng tends to overthink things. Please don't let her notice these things. The office had returned to tranquility, and Yichen couldn't concentrate on his work for a while. He glanced at the time. It was almost time to get off work. He decided to close the case files and deal with them tomorrow. As he stood by the window, he was waiting for Mosheng to appear in his line of sight. It seemed that Yi Mei had once asked him why he could wait so patiently. In fact, waiting had nothing to do with time. It was a habit that grew freely, and he couldn't resist it. Mosheng was already walking around with a camera, and she appeared in his field of vision, standing under the shade of a tree and lowering her head as she pressed some buttons. A new message popped up on Yichen's phone. Yichen, I got my bonus today. I'm treating you to dinner. I'll be there at your place soon. Yichen smiled faintly, as if she was right in front of him. He was about to reply to her when his phone rang. After the call, he saw 2 more messages. You're not replying, are you not home? Poor thing, where did Yichen leave you now? So impatient. Yichen couldn't help but shake his head. He had only been on the phone for about 10 minutes. He quickly replied to her, no need to come up, wait for me downstairs as usual. Yichen stood by the window, waiting for Mosheng to appear in his sight. It was as if Yi Mei had asked him once why he could be so patient. Actually, waiting had nothing to do with time. It was a habit that grew freely, and he couldn't resist it. Mosheng appeared in his view with her camera swinging around. She stood under the shade of a tree, her head lowered as she fiddled with the buttons. Another message appeared on Yichen's phone. Yichen, I'm here. Come down quickly. As usual, I'll count to 1,000. End of the story.